Awesome. So Marnie, Toby, welcome. And thank you, Expedia Group, for sponsoring our summit this week. We are so excited to have you here today to talk about creating accessible workplace ecosystems there at Expedia Group. So thank you both.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah,
we're excited to be here.
Awesome. So Meg, thanks for that intro, but I thought we could dive a little bit deeper now and talk about why this topic is so important to you. Talk a little bit about both of your personal journeys with disability and neurodivergence. Toby, I don't want to call you out, but do you want to go first on that one?
Oh, I'm happy to go first. I was just chomping at the bit to just share why I'm so passionate about this subject. And it's because I experienced discrimination firsthand, and just blatant, overt discrimination, being told that I can't do things because of my blindness. And that just emboldened me and just, put fuel on my fire to just go change the world. And I really, hate the discrimination that many of us experience, despite which marginalized background you may identify with. The oppression and marginalization is it's unjust, it's unfair, it's unwarranted, and it's counterproductive to societies. And I'm just out to make the world a more inclusive and accessible place for everyone.
I love that. Thank you. And I know one thing we share, kind of growing up in small town Tennessee, not easy to, have a disability, being in high school and at that age, it's something that really kind of sticks with you going, not kind of fitting in because of your disability. So I'm sure that wasn't easy.
Yeah, for sure. I was diagnosed at a fairly young age. Started losing my night vision when I was a kid and my color perception. And I even had teachers in high school tell me that I was stupid. I didn't learn my colors, but it was because I couldn't see. Like literally the rods and cones in my retinas were dying. It had nothing to do with my level of intelligence, but just, even though like I had this diagnosis, I still tried to hide it. And I went through a lot of my adolescence and teenage years just like masking. It's like, oh, there's nothing wrong with my eyes or whatever. But then at some point, like college in my 20s, I just couldn't hide it anymore. It's like I had to start using a white cane because I was perceived as a jerk because I would bump into people because I was losing my peripheral vision and I wouldn't see people to my sides. And, for a long time, I'd rather be perceived as a jerk than blind because there's such stigma around it. But at some point, I just had to embrace it and just like, this is my plight. This is what I'm doing. I have no choice or control in the matter. So I just started carrying a white cane, just for identification purposes. And really, that started changing the perception. And having confidence, I always say confidence is always rewarded, because if you just lean into your identity, I know that's very hard for a lot of us to do, and it's not always accepted by many people around us. But for our own sanity's sake, we have to accept who we are. And that led to me getting a guide dog, my first guide dog, Zakai, and he changed my life even more just by giving me a lot more independence back and freedom to move around. And that's what really unlocked my world, was having that level of mobility and independence that the dog brought.
Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing your journey that hasn't been easy, and just kind of, showing yourself to the world and making that disability very visible, I'm sure hasn't been easy. Marnie, I'd like to switch to you and tell our audience today about your personal journey with neurodivergence, which perhaps has been a bit more invisible than Toby's.
Yeah. My experience has been, I feel like my whole life has led to this moment. Okay. I've had three major life experiences that led me to get involved with Toby and co-found AIM. And that was when I was 14, my mom was diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor and she was given 6 months to live. She lived for 6 years and I ended up staying home and not going to college my first year because I couldn't leave. I had a nervous breakdown. I could not leave. And even though I'd had a nervous breakdown, I didn't realize that had something to do with mental illness. I just thought it was the extreme stress of losing a mom. As my mom was dying and she was, I was home, I did end up going to college. And while I was in college, I got a phone call that my little sister had been paralyzed in a car accident. So I was 20. She was 3 days before her 16th birthday, and my mom was terminally ill. So I spent the next 7 months pretending to be my sister's mom and going to the hospital every day. And when she went home, I was a mess. So those were disability related. So caregiver, loved one. And then when I was 49 years old, I was diagnosed with bipolar, ADHD, OCD, PTSD, a really tough form of depression, and generalized anxiety disorder. So that's how I came here. But the funny thing is, once I found out, I just wanted to talk about it. I felt like after all this stuff, I was meant to talk about it and help people who can't talk about it. And in fact, I had a call yesterday. Just yesterday, a woman reached out to me from Expedia who had heard me speak, and she wanted to know how I had the courage to disclose. But what I found is that I have been nothing but accepted. And you can't have your dream job if people don't accept you. So I do think that a disclosure is important. That doesn't mean it's easy, but I'd love to have that kind of dialogue while we're here together.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for sharing with such a wide audience as the Power to Fly community. That's kind of the, a very wide way to disclose and make it easier for other people to come forward and say, I'm dealing with an invisible disability. I'm dealing with mental health challenges. I think normalizing it makes it so much easier for the rest of the world. And, dealing with that tragedy as a young person too is really a tough way to start your 20s.
It was.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for.
Right. So, and she's still paralyzed. And, so I still get to see what happens in the world that makes it difficult for her, which reinforces my deep desire to make this a more friendly place for everyone.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you for sharing your personal journeys. I thought we could translate that into the amazing work that y'all have done at Expedia Group with the AIM Employee Resource Group. I thought you could tell us a little bit about how it's been founded and why it's so important to the organization there.
Yeah, I'll start. It was founded out of just sheer frustration and desperation. They say necessity is the motherhood of invention, is the old cliche. And I'd say, I was reaching a point where my blindness had, or I should say people's perception of my ability had created a ceiling in my career. And really that frustration and, anxiety, led to my diagnosis of having depression, anxiety, and panic disorder, PTSD, and which I had already known about my ADHD from college, diagnosis back then. But all these things sort of culminated, like I just felt so alone, like I was the only person at Expedia Group with a disability. But I knew that couldn't be true because we know statistically that, something like 20% of the world's population have a disability. And I think, Marnie will talk more about this, like 1 out of 4 people have some sort of mental illness or is affected by mental illness. And so I just knew that I wasn't the only person And just by happenstance, Marnie was referred to me by a colleague for support on a talk I was giving. And so Marnie and I just instantly became fast friends. Marnie not only helped me design a fabulous talk and presentation to give, but also, became the co-founder of AIM. So we together knew that there was a cohort of people at Expedia like us who were having a similar experience, but were unheard. So we came together and in the summer of 2018 and started finding like-minded people, just, talking with others, with our colleagues, and finding people who were interested and passionate about disability inclusion, about mental wellness, mental illness support, and all the things that were near and dear to our hearts. And, we came together as a group in the fall of 2018, and I had used my experience from starting a nonprofit and working in the, in the nonprofit sector to create a charter. Expedia Group had no infrastructure for ERGs. We had a few ERGs that were sort of self-governed and self-started around LGBTQ and other marginalized groups, but there was no official program. We had a couple of part-time or half-time, head counts dedicated to it in HR, but very little official policy and protocol. So I created, with the help of our founding members, we created a board of directors. We built a charter, and we sort of came together and officially started September 2018. Had our first member meeting in January of 2019 with 40 people, and that's where it all began, and it's just grown from there.
Wow. So this, started as the two of you, kind of a meeting of the minds. And then it sounds like so much more work went into it besides just starting, an ERG, really laying the framework, designing a charter, coming up with how the ERG will operate. There's a lot of base work that needs to go into that. And, this is on top of your regular jobs that Expedia you were doing at the time. So
all this off the side of our desk. And we inspired the other existing ERGs to because Marnie brought something to the table that's so important to me, which is what we called solidarity. We've sort of evolved that into intersectionality, but the concept is that our voices are stronger together, so we're better together. So if all of us marginalized groups unite our voices for the rights and inclusion of oppressed people, then we're going to get more done. So, the rising tide will lift all the boats. So we started collaborating with these other ERGs, and AIM co-authored with Pride a 95-page playbook for how to start an ERG. Because the folks working on this back then were, when I asked if they had templating or resources that I could use, they said no, but if you create it, we'll use it. And so we did just that. We created a 95-page playbook complete with instructions for how to start an ERG, how to grow it, templating for finance, budget, just all the components that one would need to run an organization. And that playbook was used to build the current what we call IND, Inclusion and Diversity program that we have today, and IBGs, as we call them, inclusion business groups. And love to hear Marnie's take on this.
Yeah, Marnie, tell us more, Marnie. I'd love to hear.
I think there was latent need. There was a latent need for this. And so I think we just had we had really good timing and the right.
Yeah, exactly.
And we now have over 1,100 members of AIM. And we have a parents and caregivers subgroup. It's a private channel where parents and caregivers can talk about the challenges that they face. And we also have our neurodivergence subgroup where we can have conversations about the unique, situations that people with neurodivergence find themselves
Mhm.
at work. And we regularly survey our community, and we found that 85% of the people that have joined AIM are there for mental illness and neurodiversity. So
Right.
it's a really, really big need. And I think we get comments daily on thank you for creating a safe space.
Mhm. And I'd just
I
like to
love
point out that statistically, that number is aligned with, I think, gosh, I hope I get these stats right, but I think something like 80%, 70 or 80% of disabilities are hidden. And it's just overwhelmingly comprised of cognitive disabilities, which includes, mental illness, neurodiversity, ADHD, these things that often go unseen and undiagnosed, or at least underdiagnosed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to have a forum where people can feel comfortable to acknowledge those, to speak to those, to, kind of pull back the cloak. So it's so inspiring to hear the work that you've done both for AIM at Expedia Group, as well as the work you've done in terms of intersectionality and really creating that community where all ERGs can thrive. So I love to hear about your camaraderie with other ERGs there at the organization. Before we move forward, Ruby, thank you for your comment for Marnie. That's so sweet of you. And audience, we love to hear your questions for Marnie and Toby and your comments. So anything you'd like to ask our panel here today, feel free to add those in the chat and we'll try to get to those questions. Awesome. So switching a bit away from AIM, I'd love to talk more about Expedia Group's approach to neurodivergent inclusivity. And I know there's a lot of ways y'all do this, both with recruiting candidates, accommodating employees, and even making your products more accessible to users. So I thought we could talk, first of all, perhaps about how you make recruiting candidates a more inclusive experience.
Well, I'll start by saying that we've begun publishing a ton of content on our career site about what we are doing in this space, and there's a lot more that we have to do, but we are striving to create a more welcoming place where people feel more understood and appreciated. And fundamental to that, we've launched recently a application and interview accommodation request program. So there's a link on the career site that that one can click on to request an accommodation, and then those are sent to the recruiter who is trained to work with the hiring manager to implement those accommodation requests. And those aren't limited to any disability type. It's just sort of left open. Just tell us what you need, and we will do our best to accommodate those requests in the application and interview process. And specifically for people who are blind or low vision, like myself, we are part of the IRA employer network, and IRA is artificial intelligence remote access. It's an application that blind and low vision users have on our phones, and it allows a remote live agent to use the camera to help us see, and they can also remotely access our computers to help us click through websites that aren't accessible. We've also worked to that end. We've also worked with our vendor to make the website compliant, such that I don't need IRA, but it's there if I do.
That's so cool. It's so great that Expedia Group is giving candidates that space, to let your recruiting team know what they need. And IRA sounds like it really can, help people like you with low vision to really kind of open a lot of doors and make, this world of remote work so much easier. So glad to know that all those possibilities are available.
I'd like to add that, yes, we're enthusiastic about making EG the best place for all types of workers to work. But we're not done. especially when it comes to the invisible disabilities. People are afraid to talk about it. People don't know how to talk about it. So a couple of other things that we're doing that I think are important and relevant is we are reworking the way we train people to interview. Because if somebody has, say, an anxiety disorder and they're incredibly stressed going into the interview, they might have something happen. And if the interviewer doesn't understand that that could be related to a mental health challenge, they may just say, oh, well, this person can't handle anxiety. They're out of here, right? So that's one thing. We got to fix that. And oh my gosh, did I forget what I was going to say?
I was just thinking about little things like making eye contact can really
Yeah.
be difficult for some people with certain disability, and could be misunderstood by a hiring manager who's conducting an interview. So just like training managers.
Yeah, that's what we're
just the
creating. That was the other
basic
thing.
disability inclusion. Yeah.
Yeah, we're creating a training on mental illness and neurodiversity that's targeted at managers, but is open to anyone. And it's from the voice of AIM. So it is we did empathy interviews with about 50 of our AIM members, and that resulted in a course that we're going to offer to the company from their perspective.
Right.
Oh,
And that is a fast follow to the already required disability 101.
Yeah.
That's required for all managers at the company. So that there's just an introduction to disability, the course that's required for managers, which I believe impacts not only the hiring process, but also the how managers work with existing employees.
Yeah, I think that that's so important, that these type of trainings for managers, both for, recruiting, hiring, as well as for your employees. And let's talk more about employees, but we got some great comments from the chat. I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name correctly. Jojo, the work on ND and mental illnesses that the team is doing is key to the workplace being a safe space to all, especially when looking at that from the intersectional point of view. So really glad you are aligned with us there. And Anatita, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Marnie, Toby, any points you want to add on this one? What if the employee or the candidate doesn't quite know what they need? They just know they need help. From your experience in AIM, what would you recommend to a person like that?
I would recommend that they talk with me or they talk with someone in AIM, right? I mean, ask the community, what have you done? Right? Because there's probably 1,000 ideas of ways you can address it. But most importantly, we need it to be a safe place for you to talk to your manager and your HR professional, because your HR professional will have experience with accommodations that have worked in the past, might have other ideas. And the manager needs to be involved because they need to be bought in, and it's going to help them learn and grow. That's what I would say.
I love that.
I would add to that. I mean, just sort of the same thing Marnie's saying. It's just know yourself, educate yourself on what are your rights and responsibilities. What are the rights and responsibilities of the employer, the potential employer, if you're a candidate, or find your community. Practice self-advocacy, learn how to self-advocate and practice it, because it's really scary. It's super scary to self-advocate, but it's so important to one's success to be able to do so. So find your people and practice self-advocating.
I love that, Toby. I'm sure the first time you picked up the cane, as you mentioned, that was a really scary experience. And, now you're climbing mountains with your guide dog. So I'm sure every time you advocate for yourself, it gets easier.
Just to be clear, no dogs were injured in the making of this summit. I do not take my dog on glaciers or vertical rock walls, but I do take her on backcountry hikes. So for all you dog lovers out there.
Awesome. So we talked a little bit about accommodating employees. Anything else you want to add there? Or I'm sure I am also super interested to hear about how Expedia Group is making your products more accessible.
Yeah, I can dive into that. I too have my dream job, much like Marnie, who by the way taught me how to have my dream job. So thank you, Marnie, for changing my life. I look after inclusive travel since last September, so I'm about 10 or 11 months into this role, which was created for me because I was doing the work off the side of my desk for years, you know, seeing the opportunity that we had to go after a $200 billion market, because people with disabilities are traveling more than the average traveler, and we want to travel even more, according to survey data. So I saw the potential, and I also have a lived experience because I travel with a guide dog. I experience a lot of discrimination and friction in travel. So everything from just doing paperwork to get my dog onto a flight, to all the way through to literally being kicked out of a hotel lobby, having my reservation canceled because the proprietor didn't want a dog in his hotel. That happened to me in Belgium on a Friday night. Left me on the street with nowhere to stay. So I've experienced this firsthand, how difficult it is for people with disabilities to travel, and how anxiety ridden it can be. And I just wanted to change that. And I wanted to use the power of Expedia's platform to affect that change. So I officially started doing this. There's a entire team of us now working on it. And we are, we started back in 2014 working on our digital experience. We have an amazing digital experience, but the opportunity still exists in making the in-trip experience better, improving outcomes for travelers with accessibility needs. So to that end, we are working with our supply partners to get better and more accurate information about travel products like lodging, hotels and vacation rentals, activities, and so on, and surfacing that to the right user at the right time. So it's no easy task to do this. We have a long way to go, but we are using Expedia's relationship with our partners to encourage them to share more and better information. We are building our digital experience such that travelers with accessibility needs can more easily find the products that suit their needs and be more confident in booking those products with us. And most importantly, we're listening to the traveler. We're asking for feedback, and we're using that to improve the experience for everyone.
Oh, that's so cool. As a product owner, are there any examples or features that you want to highlight that you're especially proud of?
Yeah, I mean, adding sort and filter functionality so that it's just more easy for travelers to find products. Building reporting capability. So like in my case, if I experience discrimination or if I find inaccurate content or fraudulent content on the site, I can report that. So that's something that we're really proud of. And again, just onboarding more relevant inventory, so more accessible rooms from hotels and better information from our partners.
That's so cool. I love that. And I really empathize with your experience with the guide dog in Belgium. That sounds horrible to be, out on the street on Friday night with your dog. I've traveled a lot around South America, particularly, and, there are many things that make travel, tricky for people with disabilities. However, I am motivated. I just saw where I live, a girl with mobility issues, mobility difficulties made the summit of the highest mountain in my province, which is like 10,000 feet above sea level. And so it was, slowly but surely, I feel like changes are coming. I want to circle back. We're getting some cool questions in the chat. Maybe Marnie, do you want to take, we have a question from Tegan. Do you want to take, Tegan asks, how can you tell us, how do you get buy-in from managers to generate that culture of accountability, to get involved with these initiatives? Y'all mentioned those great trainings that you're having, but that's true. How do you get buy-in from managers to, participate, and, really listen?
Well, some managers are just naturally carers, they care about people and they want to get involved, but that's not the norm. I think the biggest thing that we did as a company was that we created an IND group. So we hired a chief inclusion officer, and he has built out a team of inclusion and diversity professionals to support the company. So, historically, it's just been the ERGs that have been trying to drive everything from the grassroots level up. But I think the fact that we have an actual organization of IND is really great. Recently, we actually combined our people functions with our IND functions. So it'll be interesting to see how that benefits or what kinds of challenges might come up with those two sitting so closely together.
And I would add to that, when you're approaching managers, just on a very practical level, like Marnie said, you start with empathy. This is just the right thing to do. And you're going to get a lot of people on board from that perspective. But as Marnie pointed out, it's not going to win everyone. So you sort of move to the business case. And especially in a market that we're in right now, where it's an employee market, and we have, there's a lot of companies with many jobs, unemployment's record low. There's an untapped market here. Something like 70% of people with disabilities, the ages 18 to 64, aren't participating in the job market. And for those of us who are participating in the job market, the unemployment rate is twice that of the national average. So that there's a huge untapped market here of talented folks who want to gain and maintain employment. And then, there's a sort of legal component. We have a mandate in many countries that we employ a percentage of workers who identify as disabled. So in the US, it's 7% for federal contractors. Unfortunately, that's not enforced in the private sector unless the company is a federal contractor. But in a lot of countries, it is enforced in the private sector. So there is, that paradigm as well. So you kind of have the empathy, the right thing to do. You have the business case, the untapped market, and then you have the legal component that may be a motivator as well.
Yeah, I love that, the business case, especially in this candidate's job market. It really makes sense, for companies. And it sounds like in terms of the legal sense, Expedia Group definitely, kind of has their money where their mouth is. But thinking about Stephanie's question, maybe do y'all have experience, or, what could you recommend for a company or a candidate or an employee if their HR department doesn't recognize these disabilities, even with they reference a signed ADA form? Is there any way to advocate for yourself without being viewed as the problem employee?
Well, that's a tough one. I mean, it's true that the stigma exists, bias exists, and that is that's a headwind that we face. I think, like I said earlier, finding the community, finding your people, also engaging with local nonprofits who can help advocate for you, help educate leadership. So there's a lot of charities out there who, at little or no cost to you or the company, can provide training and education to leaders. I realize, saying that there's barriers to even, getting the company to listen. But I think again, collecting those marginalized voices, it's hard to ignore a large group of people who are saying the same thing, like that we want to be heard. And so uniting marginalized groups and approaching leadership with that voice of solidarity.
I love that. I love that. We're greater than the sum of our parts.
Yeah.
But we also need to address the individual issues that come up as they arise. You know, I had an experience my first year at Expedia Group where I was being discriminated against actively, and I didn't know what to do. How do I prove it? I have mental illness. It's not like, you know, I couldn't get in because my wheelchair didn't fit in the elevator or something, right? So I, as an ally and an activist for people with disabilities, had to learn how to stand up for myself. Right? Because before I could have been like, but then I'm like, wait, I'm the vice president of AIM. I guess I better say something. Right? And I learned a lot. I learned what I should have done earlier in the process. And I learned what works when you have an issue and you need support. So now I can help the rest of the AIM community or anybody at Expedia really navigate the challenges when you aren't being accepted for who you are and are being discriminated against.
That's so great that you're able to kind of share those learnings, having gone through it yourself. And I think, Marnie, this really ties in to what you've written on the Expedia Group blog. You've written a lot about the limitations of workplace wellness programs to help people with mental illness and invisible disabilities. What kind of procedures or policies do you think can work hand in hand with wellness programs to ensure that people with mental illness or invisible disabilities have what they need to really succeed in the workplace?
Yeah, I wish it was easy. There's not an easy answer. I would say there is a really big taboo around mental illness. There is a taboo with neurodiversity, but maybe not quite so much because it's not positioned as an illness and because people, okay, I'm going to say this, rich people's kids have it, right? So it gets more attention. People with neurodiversity really struggle in the workplace. I'm not saying they don't, they do. It's a little easier to talk about neurodiversity though, because it's prevalence in the tech industry. And I'm not against well-being and wellness activities. I think that they can be really helpful, but they're not a cure. And that's the thing. You wouldn't recommend somebody with a broken leg to go running as a way to strengthen their bones. Right?
Yeah, yoga is not going to solve this problem as much as we all love yoga.
I could go to a yoga class and 20 minutes later have a panic attack. Right? It's not related. The yoga is great and really helpful to me as a human being and as a body, right? But mental illness is actually an illness. And those activities don't change the chemistry of my brain. So I think there is, the challenge is if there was one thing we could do, we do it. But it's unique to the person because I listed off all the illnesses I have because we often don't just have one. We're comorbid with multiple. And so that means that I have to be looked at as a unique individual. Now, there could be standard things, right? People like me who have problems with attention, or I have OCD as well. So stuff out of place kind of bothers me. I might say working from home as much as I can and having a whiteboard. Those have saved me. And they're not that hard to implement, right? But it was unique to me and it's made the difference. That's all I've really needed. But someone else might need a different set of things. And so I think the breakthrough that we want to make is that managers get that these don't make us worth less. In fact, my psychiatrist told me there would be no beautiful things, no innovative things, no cool, awesome things in the world if we didn't have people with mental illness and neurodiversity. We would not. So we are where the magic is, and we have innovation built in. So if a manager can go, wait a second, maybe this person would be an advantage on my team. That's what I want. I want the managers to see the potential. And I think that's obviously why I focus on training for the managers. So
Yeah, I
it's
want
not
to see.
easy. We don't have a bunch of solutions, but Toby might have one or two.
Well, I just want to see parity with physical and mental health. So wellness is great. I use meditation to manage my symptoms, and it's fabulous. But I also use exercise to manage my physical health, but it doesn't help when something goes wrong with my physical health. And we're starting to hear, speak about this even at the national policy level with bringing parity between mental health and physical health. So just like physical health, we have wellness and preventative care and all these things, but we also have insurance and policies and practices, procedures, whatever that help us when we become physically ill. So mental illness should be treated the same way, where we have great programs like wellness and preventative care for mental health, but we also have the insurance policies, procedures, protocols in place for those of us who live with mental illness, whether it be permanent, temporary, or episodic. Whatever our experience is like, that it should be treated the same way and with the same lack of stigma. Physical health doesn't have the same stigma and bias, and we need to remove that from mental health as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's so true. Like the new, calling 988 should be just as accessible and easy as calling 911 when you're having an emergency. And yet, I don't think I've ever had a health insurance plan where mental health was treated like physical health. That definitely hasn't, been my case in dealing with multiple healthcare providers. And even looking at the strike of mental health providers going on in California right now, there's definitely, room to improve mental health as it serves our communities. I want to, if it's okay with y'all, we're going to switch away a little bit from that. And Toby, I want to dig a little bit deeper and talk about how you really have been able to live with your disability in the workplace, if that's all right with y'all. I know that you are using some pretty cool assistive technologies for the work you do daily. So I'd love to hear more about those. How do those work? Give our community the details there. And then, how does that work for professionals to format their work, to really kind of use the computer in this remote world we're living in?
Sure. And I just want to start by saying that, assistive technologies they cover the gamut, like Marnie's whiteboard. It's been very simple assistive technology. And there's a myth around the cost of job accommodations that we are too expensive to accommodate as disabled people. But the average cost is only like $500 a year. I use a screen reader. I use JAWS for Windows. JAWS is an acronym that stands for Job Access with Speech. I also use VoiceOver on the Apple platforms. And those are assistive technologies that read aloud information that is visible on the screen. Again, they're very inexpensive relative to what it costs to employ people. VoiceOver is free, built in to the Apple platform. JAWS is a couple $100 a year to upgrade or to keep current. It's maybe $1,000 to purchase the initial license. So in the scheme of things, it's not very expensive. I can't see the mouse pointer, so I use the keyboard to navigate. And to that end, designers and developers have to build inclusively. And I like to say that inclusive design is good design. So if we get this right, for those of us who need it most, it will inherently be more awesome for everybody. If we build websites such that I can navigate with the keyboard and use the screen reader, then they're going to be better and easier to use with a mouse. They're going to be more stable. They're going to be more responsive, and they're going to be more consumable. Adding alt text to images is something that I every day in Slack I see people adding screenshots with no commentary or no alt text, and I have absolutely no idea what this screenshot is or this image, and simply adding text, which Slack has built the capacity for us to do as alternative text, or simply just putting a comment in line with the image, not only gives me access to the information, but anyone who maybe is listening to their messages while driving, or not using the screen. Maybe we have images disabled because we're on a slow connection while we're traveling. There's scenarios that that demonstrate inclusive design as good design. And beyond that, alt text on images makes them searchable. So if I want to go back in time and find that screenshot, and having the alt text makes that more discoverable, more searchable. Formatting is a big deal. Putting tabular data in a table so that I can use the keyboard to navigate the table, rows and columns, and I can stay oriented as to what belongs with what and where. Not using tables where they don't belong. Don't use tables for layout. Use tables for tabular data. Use on a website, you should use things like CSS and web tools to create the layout that you want. Using natural structure like heading level navigation on websites, so properly nesting headings, you should have an H1 at the top that tells what the website does, and then nest those headings underneath that for cascading information based on importance. These are just basic web design practices that we should be doing anyways, and if we do so, it makes the digital product much more inclusive and accessible.
I love that. And, I think that, also it's the law, to make websites, also it's good to do. And also it's the law.
It is the law.
ADA.
Yeah. We have tons of case law where courts have said that WCAG 2.1 level AA, that's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which not only apply to web, but to any digital content like documents and PDFs and things. That is the law. We recently have the Supreme Court saying that the ADA applies to the digital domain, and the Department of Justice has said that the WCAG guidelines are applicable here. So we have all but legislation, which I'm working on with our Congress to codify this into law. As an advocate and through my role as president of the Disability Empowerment Center in Seattle, we're lobbying Congress to codify this. So yes, it's the law. In short, it's the law.
Yeah, but I love that suggestion. That making these changes is not just good for people with disabilities, but it's good for everyone. I love that example of, putting the alt text on the screen, on the screenshot in Slack. The tool exists, we should use it. And another thing we talked about before, relating back to intersectionality, letting people give comments or ask questions in a written format rather than just speaking. That's just not good for people who may have maybe low vision, but it's good for people who are, are not speaking in their native language. Then It might take them a little bit longer to format the question. I know I need a lot longer to format questions in Spanish than I do in English. Awesome.
Same with anxiety. Someone with anxiety, it might just be better for them to write the answers than maybe have a panic attack in the interview.
Oh, that's such a good point. Marnie. So we've got one more question from Kay, and then we're going to wrap it up. So Kay asks, what online shareable resources do you recommend as a reference when composing an accommodation request? And that's a big one. So Marnie and Toby, you both have your thinking faces on. Any kind of, just doesn't have to be the number one resource, but any favorite resources that come to mind to share with Kay?
Yeah, there's Disability In. It's disability inclusion, but the brand is Disability In. They have a ton of resources around equal access to employment. Also, there's a lot of influencers on YouTube that that I love their advice and commentary direction. There's a really cool channel called How to ADHD that I love. I'm sorry the name is escaping me of the woman who runs that channel, but it's easy enough to find How to ADHD. It's really cool because that's a common diagnosis, the one that I have. And Marnie, did you have other shareable resources?
I was just going to be totally honest that I just am really good at searching the internet. You know, if I need to write up something around accommodation, I'd just search until I found the ones that I like and then kind of combine them together into my request. But
yeah, and I just thought of another one called the Job Accommodation Network, JAN, which is a .gov by the Department of Labor. That has a wealth of resources that you can reference. And I should have thought of that first because Job Accommodation Network. So that's a great resource that you can use from the Department of Labor.
And you should work with your doctor, because your doctor has probably had to do this before, right? Help someone get an accommodation, and they may have some tips and tricks for you. And honestly, we listen when a doctor says you need an accommodation.
Yeah, and I would expand that to healthcare professional, because my GP probably knows a lot less than my therapist does about how to accommodate my mental illness. So yeah, listen to ask and work with your healthcare professional.
Yeah,
that's a really good tip. That's a really good tip. Awesome. So to wrap up, because we've just got 1 or 2 more minutes, I'd love each of you to kind of give our audience your kind of final goodbye parting message. You know, what do you want to share? What do you want our team to take away from today?
Oh my gosh. The first thing that popped into my mind was, this is scary and it takes a lot of courage, but it's worth it. Self-advocate, learn to self-advocate, find your community, surround yourself with people who share your experience, and be brave. This is the movement of our time, and you have a lot of people around you, whether you know it or not, who share your experience and who care about your success. So lean in to your identity.
The thing that came up for me was be what you want to receive. So if you want to receive kindness, be kind. If you want to receive love, be loving. If you want to receive compassion, be compassionate. I think that's the best we can do, is model the behaviors that we want from others. And when others fail us, we need to say something. They won't learn unless we say something.
I love that. Thanks so much, Marnie, Toby, for those parting words. Thank you for your time today. It's been really great to speak to you about AIM, about your personal journeys with disability and neurodivergence. It's so cool to hear all the things y'all are doing there at Expedia Group and for the wider audience. And then also, as I work with Expedia Group here at Power to Fly, I just want to shout out that they are going to be in our virtual job fair. That's going to be tomorrow at 11 Eastern. So if you are interested in talking with recruiters at Expedia, learning more about their job openings, I encourage y'all to check that out tomorrow at 11 Eastern.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you
Thanks,
both
Wendy.
For making this happen.